So the Canucks' search for new GM is finally over. After the firing of Patrick Alvin, they've decided to replace him with an internal hiring of Ryan Johnson. And as it turns out, the Sedins are also going to be co-presidents of hockey operations, with Jim Rutherford stepping down. And as a fan, I just kind of want to go over some of my thoughts on the positives and negatives and my initial feelings about this hiring. Now, first, I want to acknowledge something that a lot of people have rightly expressed concern with, and that, Ryan Johnson being an internal hire, he was part of not one but two past failed regimes of both Jim Benning and Patrick Alvin. And yeah, that causes some people to say that they'd like, a fresh face with new ideas that's not tied to past regimes in there. And that's fair, but in a way, I could see that being a positive just because, for one, yeah, Ryan Johnson was technically a part of those regimes, but he wasn't the final decision maker. He wasn't the reason why they went wrong. And, and him being there, he obviously would have seen what went wrong and he would understand what went wrong. So I think you could look at that as he's a guy that knows what not to do when it comes to building a team or rebuilding a team. And the fact that he was on the team during the Benning years, and Alvin and Rutherford decided to not only keep him on, but they thought highly enough of him to promote him and elevate him, and even want him and even for Rutherford to want him as their successor. I think that speaks volumes. The biggest positive with Ryan Johnson that people seem to point out is the fact that he was the GM of the Calder Cup winning Abbotsford Canucks in the AHL. Obviously winning in the AHL is nowhere near the same as the NHL, but it does show that he understands, basic mechanics of what's important to a roster, how you build a team that's good, what kind of players you need that's good, what kind of locker room atmosphere you need that's good. That also brings me to another thing I want to talk about, is that a huge headline for this team the last couple of years has been locker room drama. There's been a ton of it. It's been public. It's been a cancerous, toxic locker room, and it's been a problem. But, the fact that he's been part of the team and he knows what happened and what players were at fault and who needs to go, and what kind of players need to come in, as opposed to bringing in somebody from outside like Evan Gold, who doesn't need to spend time trying to figure it out. Combine that with the fact that he knows what a healthy locker room looks like in Abbotsford, as, Max Sasson alluded to in his interview recently. Him and the Sedins being in charge, do show a lack of experience in the head office department, since, neither of them has been a head GM or a president of hockey operations before, and that's fair, and, that is a disadvantage. It's not something that's guaranteed to come back and bite them, but it definitely still could. However, this kind of makes me wonder if they're going to bring in an assistant GM with head GM experience. Since Ryan Johnson, being the assistant, is getting promoted, somebody is probably going to need to take over his duties. And the team obviously knows that there's some inexperience. And during their GM search, there were two guys who were head GMs of teams. Kevin Adams, who was the GM of the Buffalo Sabres, and Pierre Dorian, who spent 11 years as GM of another Canadian market in Ottawa. It's making me wonder if they might bring in someone like that as a GM. Now, Pierre Dorian, I wanted him absolutely nowhere near this team as the GM when there was talk that could happen, and I think any Canucks fan that felt the same way as me was absolutely justified. But bringing in somebody like a Pierre Dorian as an assistant GM, I wouldn't mind. Just because, one, he's got valuable Canadian market experience, even if the end result was bad. Hopefully he would have learned from that, and, he can bring his experience in a role where he's not the final decision maker. I think something like that would at least be worth looking at. And another thing I kind of want to touch on is that this team is rebuilding, and Johnson, having been the GM of the AHL team, I think would have would have some pretty good insight on what makes for good development for rookies and prospects. And, you know, the Sedins having worked with a lot of them in coaching roles. Like, to me, this front office just kind of screams like something that's ideal for a rebuild, for like something with a lot of fixating on drafting and developing. Like, I kind of feel like if they were going for a retool on the fly, or rebuild on the fly, you know, like Jim Benning tried to do disastrously, that I feel like they would have hired someone else. But anyway, those are just kind of my initial thoughts on it. Overall, I feel positive. I mean, there's a couple of alarm bells that go off with the lack of experience, but, you know, between having Dale Talon as an advisor to GM, Rutherford staying on, I think at least, as an advisor to the Sedins as presidents of hockey ops, and who knows, maybe bringing in somebody with GM experience to be the AGM. Like, I think there's probably going to be enough experience, you know, in that office that it's not going to be like a massive concern, even if the experienced guys are not the ones that are making the final decisions, especially if they bring in an experienced AGM like a Pierre Dorian or a Kevin Adams, or who knows who else might be out there. But yeah, no, it's a very interesting day to be a Canucks fan. I'm very curious to see what kind of philosophy they're going to have at the draft. It's going to give us a lot of insight to see like what players they take where. Like, are they going to target guys with as high of a ceiling as possible and risk guys who also have high bust potential, or are they going to play it safe and draft, you know, high floor but only medium ceiling players? It's going to be very interesting to find out. But anyway, that's all I have to say for this video. Hopefully you found my insight intriguing in some way, and hopefully I maybe made you think of some things that you didn't think of before. But anyway, have a nice day.